Using humor in data storytelling is probably the riskiest thing you can do in a presentation. Telling a joke while telling a story is either going to work amazingly well or horribly awful. So, if you want to tell a joke or use some humor, then here are my recommendations. First and foremost, the joke should be relatively subtle so that if some people in the audience don't get it, then you can just move on and forget about it. Don't make a joke that anyone could find offensive, so jokes about political situations or religions or other deeply held beliefs should definitely be avoided. Don't make a joke about someone in particular or about a group of individuals, for example, from some country or race or gender. Self-deprecating humor can often work well because it can lighten the mood, it shows that you have humility, and no one's going to be offended. Here is an example of the kind of joke that I might tell. This figure highlights the importance of technological developments in our understanding of how the brain works. What you see here is a graph showing the number of brain cells that can be recorded at the same time over different years. Recording from more brain cells simultaneously is important because the brain computations that underlie cognition and thought occur in a distributed manner across a population of brain cells. And so over time, as technology improved, we were able to get a better understanding of how the brain works. This was a particularly important year because that's the year I was born. Now, this study is several years old now, and it doesn't show the most recent advances in optical imaging, which are vastly increasing the recording possibilities. Okay, that's the end of my little presentation. So you'll notice that I used a little bit of humor at the end to suggest my birth year. There were two aspects of this joke that were funny. First is the idea that somehow my birth was relevant for the intersection of technology and neuroscience research. I'm recording this now in the year of 2019, but I indicated that I was born somewhere in the year 2005. Now, that part may or may not be funny to you by just listening to me, but if I'm standing in front of you, then you would see that I definitely do not look like I'm around 15 years old. So clearly I was not born in the year 2005. After I told this joke, I paused for a few seconds to let the audience think about what I said, and then I just went straight on with the next point in the presentation. That way, if people didn't think it was funny or didn't get it, then it wouldn't have detracted from the overall presentation. A second way you can use humor in data storytelling is to put a joke or something funny into the visual presentation without really talking about it. I'm now going to give you another example, this one from an introductory lecture to a course I teach on linear algebra, which is the branch of mathematics that's most important for machine learning and data science. And this is from the course introduction. On this slide, I'm talking about how linear algebra has changed over the past several decades from being largely theoretical to being largely about applications to solve real-world problems in data science, statistics, graphics, and so on. And then on this slide, I say that many people think that these kinds of analyses and concepts in linear algebra are really magical or at least really, really complicated and require a PhD in mathematics. But in fact, that's not true, and with a high school level of math and some dedication, I believe that anyone can learn linear algebra. So you can see that I didn't really talk about this slide or say anything in particular that is funny. People will look at this slide and they might recognize this webcomic, or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll think it's funny, or maybe they won't, and it doesn't really detract from the presentation because my presentation doesn't depend on them understanding it. On the other hand, it lets the audience know that I'm not just some robot, but instead I also spend time browsing and possibly wasting some time on the internet. I like to look at funny things just like everyone else. It's an anchor point for the audience to connect with me as a person. Again, the important thing here is that I don't spend a lot of time on the joke, and my presentation doesn't depend on someone else thinking that this joke is funny. Another thing that you need to be mindful of is a potential for a language barrier. Jokes can be very difficult if you're giving a presentation to people who are not very fluent in the language you are presenting in. In conclusion, humor is a high-risk but high-reward feature of data storytelling. If you're going to include humor in your storytelling, don't make it too important, and definitely don't risk offending any one person or group of people. Only include humor if it feels like it's a natural part of the presentation. If your data storytelling depends on people getting a joke or thinking that a joke is funny, there is a risk that it could backfire.